Hello, everyone. We're live. Hello, and welcome to our latest Lincoln Live Lounge broadcast. We're trying something a little bit different today. We're talking politics. I'm sure if anyone's turned a television on in the last 48 hours, they'll be well aware there's quite an important election going on in the United States at the moment. And I'm really pleased to say that for this US election roundtable discussion, we've been able to assemble a brilliant panel of experts and expertise and insights from across the University of Lincoln, from our different schools and colleges. We've got representatives from our School of History and Heritage, and from our School of English and Journalism, and from our School of Social and Political Sciences, to really try and drill down into what's happening right now in the US, and to try and understand the historical context and also the significance of it for us here in the UK. And I'm also really pleased to be able to say that we're joined by a special guest, one of our former students, Jessica, who has a particular interest in the outcome of the US election, because she's actually joining us from the US, and I'm sure has been following results avidly from a different time zone to us. Just to, before we introduce our panelists, I'll just invite our producer, Darren, who works the magic behind the scenes here, to come in and just say a little bit about how our audience can get involved this afternoon and ask questions of our panel before we start.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed tonight's Lincoln Live. If you want to get involved, please do send your comments, questions and thoughts in the comment section. So if you're watching on Facebook, just head to the comments and write your questions there. If you're watching on YouTube, just head over to the comment section there on the right-hand side, or below if you're on mobile. Or if you're watching directly on the website, feel free to click through onto live stream itself, and if you're on YouTube, you'll be able to get involved there. If you have any questions throughout, not relating to the topic, but about university itself, then after this, there will be a live link up on our website, which will be taking place for a short time after this event, and you'll be able to go there and speak to staff and students about a range of topics and have your questions answered. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it from me.
Brilliant. Well, I think we'll do some introduction. Ian Richards. I'm Assistant Director of Communications at the University of Lincoln, and I work on the team that helps to deliver our virtual open days and our live lounge events. But it's not really about me today. It's about our great panel of experts and guests that we've been able to pull together. I'm really grateful for them joining us. So I'll ask each of our panelists in turn to introduce themselves. I think, just probably for the sake of fairness, if we just go alphabetically and start with my good friend Alex.
Thanks, Ian. I'm Alex Lefchuk, and I'm Programme Leader for the subject of Communications and Public Relations at the University of Lincoln, as well as a Senior Lecturer in the School of English and Journalism, and founder of the University radio station Siren Radio. Excellent. And Finn, would you like to just introduce yourself very quickly?
Certainly. So I'm Finn Pollard. I'm an Associate Professor in American History in the School of History and Heritage, and currently involved in co-teaching a module on the history of the presidency. So that's an interesting moment to be doing that.
Yeah, I understand you had quite an early morning this morning, Finn, because you got the bug of tuning in from a different time zone to try and see what was going on in the election. Is that right?
I very foolishly got up at 3:30 intending to take a quick look, and then I couldn't get back to sleep. So if I lose the thread of my thoughts in the course of the next hour, that's my excuse.
Yeah. Brilliant. And Jess, thanks so much for joining us. I'm really, really pleased that you can be here. Do you want to just say a little bit about yourself and why you're joining us here in Lincoln and your connection to Lincoln? I'm not sure Jess can hear us at the moment, so I'll ask.
Hello. So I studied abroad at...
Carry on, Jess. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm on the university Wi-Fi and it's struggling a bit. I studied abroad at the University of Lincoln earlier this semester and it was interrupted by COVID. So I am back home at Appalachian State University and I'm studying communications and English.
Yeah. And Mike?
Yeah.
Were you able to hear any of that?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Jess.
Yeah, I'm Mike Slavin. I'm a lecturer in international politics here, and I have a background in U.S. politics as well before I became an academic.
That's great. So I think at this point we can probably kick off the discussion, and I don't think current affairs get a great deal more current than what we're talking about right now. And I guess this is the joy of doing live broadcasts, that when we planned this event, I guess some of us, perhaps naively myself, thought we might have a result to talk about, and it's probably more exciting, I suppose, that we don't. But I'd just like to ask the panel, probably just sort of in turn, to just give us your perspective on where you think we are right now, and really what's happened in the last 48 hours. And the word knife edge has been used quite a lot in some of the news feeds today. So again, I wonder if we perhaps start with, I wonder whether we start with Mike on this one.
With me, yeah. Sorry, you cut out just a bit there, but I think you said me. Yeah. So where are we now? Well, it could be a knife edge, or it could end up being a bit more separation than it seems at the moment, but we don't really know. At the moment, I'd rather be in Joe Biden's position than Donald Trump's. Biden leads in Arizona and Nevada. That might change, but he is seemingly ahead. He's taken the lead in Michigan and Wisconsin, and winning those states and no others would be sufficient to win the Electoral College, and that's not to mention Pennsylvania and Georgia. I think that it's quite clearly not the huge cathartic / sweeping victory that a lot of Democrats had thought was possible, based on the polling and their feelings about the campaign. But while various things could still happen, I would, like I said, rather be in Biden's position at the moment. And we might, depending on what happens in those states, which won't take quite as long to count as Pennsylvania, we could know maybe by the end of the night, U.S. tonight, but who knows, right? So we're all on tenterhooks anyway.
Yeah. And Alex, from your perspective, obviously as a kind of avid consumer of news media, how has the last sort of 24 hours been for you? Have you been sort of glued to the news feeds, and what's been your take on it from, I guess, from the perspective of a journalist and communications point of view?
Well, I think it's important to remember it's a marathon, not a sprint, and it's always been the case. I suggested last week that I felt Biden might win, but by a very small majority in terms of the way that the system was panning out. I've been quite fascinated by seeing how the rest of the world has been viewing this election, whether it's the United States of anxiety that Iran and Iraq have actually been suggesting, and I'm sure there's a bit of schadenfreude from that perspective, right the way through to obviously more traditional allies of the United States. And certainly the range of kind of inputs that we've been getting has been, as expected, fairly diverse. I mean, whether this sees a change in populist policies, whether we actually see that actually America is very much split down the middle in terms of people voting for Democrats, people voting for Republicans, and the views with respect to the whole thing. Somehow there's a kind of notion that Trump's line about calling fraud so early, pressing that little button, that controversial button that we've come to know and I wouldn't say appreciate, but expect so well during his 4 years as the incumbent president of the United States, is very interesting. And I think certainly the story will continue to unfold. I'd like to feel that Mike is actually right, that we will get an answer shortly, but I suspect it may well go over a few days.
And Finn, I guess as a historian, we were discussing last week, weren't we, that just I suppose how unusual this election is for lots and lots of reasons. But how do you think, when although we don't know the result yet, how do you think this kind of election kind of rates in terms of significance? Obviously, is it a big watershed moment for the US? And what's been so strange and unusual about it, other than I guess the obvious that it's been conducted in the middle of a global pandemic?
I mean, I think what will stand out first to me at the moment is that speech Trump gave in the early hours this morning, alleging fraud, claiming to have won states where counting was still going on. Being so open and direct about that. Now, he'd been building to that position for about the last month of the campaign. But I think we've had elections before where there were contested states and debated results and these kind of things. But I think the fact that Trump, as the incumbent president, espoused the kind of language of fraud and the prospect of court cases so openly will set the election apart in that sense. It remains to be seen how lasting the significance of that is. I thought earlier this afternoon, in view of the way that the number of states that Biden is currently ahead in, as Mike was mentioning, that and especially because it looks pretty certain that the GOP will hold the Senate, that some of them might draw back from Trump's push on the sort of court case front, because they, in a sense, they control one branch almost certainly. They've got 6 justices probably on the Supreme Court. They don't need to necessarily keep Trump in the White House. But I have just seen, before we came on, Mitch McConnell has been speaking and saying, the only way to, ensure we get a settled result is to go to the courts. So they seem to be sticking quite close to Trump on that.
So we might need to reconvene in a few months' time to analyse the result.
I think they'll probably have to settle it before Inauguration Day in January. And I say probably because with Trump, you never quite know. But I think it will have to be settled.
Bear in mind,
Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Bear in mind, turkeys don't vote for Thanksgiving, to paraphrase the old statement about Christmas.
And Jess, what's the feeling like among you and your friends? I presume you've either been out and voted or perhaps voted by post. What's the sense like, kind of there on the ground in the US? Is everyone glued to the TV or the radio or the Twitter feeds?
So on campus, I'm in North Carolina, so since we're a swing state, and there's been a student to vote. Everyone was going. I voted yesterday for the first time, now that I'm of age, and I think people have just been very anxious. My friends don't want. I'm kind of the one that's been seeing what's been updated in North Carolina, but I think people are very so they're kind of trying to ignore the results at the moment.
So wait and see what the outcome is, rather than try and second guess and be anxious about it right now. And I guess from the perspective here in the UK, one sort of key question is, I think the US election is one where we're fascinated by it, and obviously the UK and the US kind of share a lot of kind of cultural elements, but why is it that we are so interested in the outcome of the US election above any other? What's the importance of it? How does it impact on our lives here in the UK and across the world? And I think that could be a question for all of our panelists. So I'll sort of invite whoever wants to sort of jump in first to kind of answer that question on the real significance of why this election result really matters.
Perhaps actually I would just take a lead on that, because I was just delivering a lecture this very afternoon about American-British relations in the 50s, actually, in the Histories of Journalism module that we deliver. And it's interesting then that there's always been this love-hate relationship, certainly, I suppose, arguably since going way back in terms of Victorian times, with respect to how we view America, the United States of America, and obviously how America views us in terms of obviously the roots of the development of both countries and so on and so forth. There's still a concern, I suppose, about cultural aspects that come across. We've got issues relating to obviously the common language that we work together. There's a connection from that point of view. Clearly, the cliched special relationship that's been manifested at various times over the years is still there, and I think undoubtedly we are. Even more so in our post-Brexit environment and our populist environment, very much tied into what is happening across the Atlantic, because both economically and indeed in terms of our position within the globe, there are issues relating to that. I mean, you don't have to go back to the Suez Canal crisis to sort of realize that America has a big insight and input in terms of what happens as far as Britain's concerned. Phil, I'm sure, is more than capable of again sort of outlining that whole relationship, in which even actually having students like Jessica exchange with us and spend time with us at the University of Lincoln is part and parcel of that special relationship. It adds to it. It develops a whole range of other elements too.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I'd sort of invite Finn to perhaps come in there and sort of pick up that thread around the kind of historical context, and obviously, that relationship between Europe and the US has got really kind of deep historical roots. So Finn, I don't know whether you want to sort of pick up on that point, and then perhaps I'll sort of invite Mike to kind of talk about that more from the perspective of kind of I guess international relations and kind of global politics.
I mean, I think the interesting thing about the sort of special or so-called special relationship is the political side of it has had a hell of a lot of ups and downs. And for most of the 19th century, the relationship was very tenuous, and on a number of occasions, the British sort of, I think, hoped that the Union might break apart, and it's only really been in the 20th century that it's become close again. And even then, it's had a lot of, as I say, a lot of peaks and troughs. On the other side of that, I think there's been a cultural connection that has remained much sort of steadier and persistent, particularly in the 20th century. I think at the present moment, from that point of view, it's got a particular resonance. And I think if viewers were following the sort of press reporting in the last sort of week, 10 days, there's been quite a lot about this because of the processes we're going through here in the UK in relation to Brexit. And in that context, the relationship with the States assumes, I think, potentially a bigger order of magnitude than it might otherwise do. So there's been a lot of sort of angst and commentary as to which potential outcome would or would not help the UK in the context of Brexit.
And Mike, that's probably a good point for sort of you to come in terms of those kind of big, I guess, sort of geopolitical kind of international relations and what this result means. Probably not just for the UK government, but kind of elsewhere. People who are interested in who sits in the White House and why.
Yeah, I mean, in the as long as I've lived here, I've had a sense that there's, I mean, while there are obvious similarities between the US and the UK, there are also in another way quite different countries and with quite different politics. But despite these differences, there has been a sense that maybe the US and the UK have often moved kind of politically in tandem, just in the context of Western politics. So you have, the Reagan and Thatcher periods roughly coinciding with each other, and Blair and Clinton roughly coinciding with each other. And now, of course, Brexit and Trump are often referred to in the same breath. In that sense, I think that there's always going to be in the UK an interest in what's going on within the kind of larger partner in this relationship, and especially in the Brexit context, because, as Finn was saying, the post-Brexit vision by the Brexiteers depends a lot on leveraging the U.S. relationship. The question of whether or not that'll really come to pass is important, and it's not. It's up to a lot of things, right? Not just one side's will or the other side's will. Trump has said sympathetic things about Brexit and about a post-Brexit UK, but I think it's also appropriate to view him as a bit capricious in terms of what he says versus what he's actually doing or actually prioritizing. Whereas I think certainly under the Obama administration, and I think this will probably continue if Biden becomes president, the emphasis on Germany is perhaps the main partner in Europe, and perhaps eclipsing the UK, and trying to get closer to Germany and the EU rather than really hitting on the relationship with the UK is an important aspect of that this election in the US could have consequences on. But I think just more than that, there is a sense that people have, regardless of how accurate it is, that these are two closely related countries whose politics often kind of go through similar phases or mirror each other, at least in the past 30 or 40 years or so. And I think that, in as much as the US represents a certain kind of alter ego for Britain, that it's always going to be of interest. And of course, it's a big show, isn't it? I mean, the campaigns in the US last forever. They're incredibly complicated, never short of news, and then they have all this geopolitical importance as well on top of that. So, I mean, certainly I'm not telling anyone to be less interested. It's good for business as far as I'm concerned to have everybody very interested in American politics, and I think everybody should be extremely interested in it. But yeah, I think there's a very, really complex set of reasons why people are interested in it. And then in particular in this election, some quite consequential policy aspects regarding international relations too.
That's great. I'm conscious that Jess, I think, is struggling a little bit with the Wi-Fi on the campus in the US, and perhaps the transatlantic nature of the connection. So we're hoping that Jess will be able to sort of join us again in a few minutes, but and we'll certainly come back to that. But I think for now, if I'm sort of keen to kind of move on. As I was watching the news yesterday, I was trying to sort of bring myself up to speed on the intricacies and complexities of the US electoral system. And I think for our viewers as well, it's really fascinating to see a different type of electoral process sort of playing out, but some of the institutions and the language and the processes do, for me, kind of feel a bit sort of opaque. I don't understand them clearly, and I wondered whether that might be something sort of Finn or Mike in particular, if you can sort of explain that US college system, which I was reading about yesterday, and I assume that there is an interesting historical story behind why the US has that college system, and then how that sort of plays out when votes are being counted. I don't know whether, Finn, that might be one that you'd want to come in on first, and then perhaps we'd move to Mike.
Sure. I mean, the Electoral College was bound up with the reality that when the Constitution is written and ratified, that you're not talking about a kind of setting up a democracy in the sense in which we would understand it today. You are talking about a republic in which they are wanting to check the various sources of power against each other, and sort of filter the will of the people through bodies that can make sure that it doesn't get too out of control. So I think the original idea of the Electoral College was that the sort of a group of elite white men, as it would have been then, would sort of filter the views of the wider corpus of Americans into the selection of a president. Now, I think the reality is that it has never really functioned in that way, and right up to the present, although we periodically get discussions about the possibility of faithless electors or electors voting for people other than those the state has backed in the vote, that very rarely actually materializes or has a real impact on the outcome of the race. So we're sort of saddled with this quite outdated system, which as I say, has never really operated properly. I think the other thing just to say about it was that it was also to do with maintaining balance between the different states within the Union. Again, there was a lot of tension in the Constitutional Convention between the small states and the larger states. In some ways, you might say at that stage that people often had more of a sort of identity with the state than they did with this new nation that had only recently been formed. And the Electoral College, along with the different modes of election to the Senate and the House, was designed so each state gets 2 senators, but the House is based on population. Again, that was part of that sort of settlement as well. And that's why there are these arguments about it skewing now to prioritize different areas. And one thing we haven't yet mentioned is also this reality that even if Trump ekes out a win now in the Electoral College, he's not going to win in the popular vote. And that's happened more in recent times and has started to raise more questions, I think, about the college. But the process for amendment is so complicated that we're likely to continue to have this system for some time, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Finn's exactly right. It requires in the American system a lot of consensus to amend the Constitution, which is probably what's needed if you're talking about switching, for instance, to the direct election of the president through the popular vote, which would be more sensible and democratic and has been talked about for a long time. And there have been some reform ideas, like an interstate compact, where states would basically all agree to just allocate their electoral votes to the popular vote winner. But because it's been so readily identified as being advantageous to one side, the Republicans, they just simply will not have any interest in changing it. And it won't necessarily be that way forever, but I think for the foreseeable future, because as Finn was saying, it advantages smaller states. These days, the smaller states are generally non-metropolitan states that tend to be whiter, more rural, and more conservative than the larger states, and they are weighted disproportionately in the presidential election, just as they are in the Senate, which is another major issue where the Democrats face an even deeper structural disadvantage, and they really are against the odds to win the Senate every time, and don't look like they will have done that in this election. So the reason it's so complicated is because it's just it's unreformed and antiquated, and the whole discussion of these states and why we should care so much about what happens to 20,000 votes in Wisconsin when there are still millions that haven't been counted in California, but nobody's, but that tranche of states out there in the Pacific, nobody talks about them, foregone conclusion. It's, one of the many really kind of deeply undemocratic aspects of the U.S. system that is a manner of entrenching minority rule. Let me just put it this way. This is the 9th presidential election of my life. it looks virtually certain that after this is all the votes are counted, the Republicans will have won the popular vote twice in my lifetime. And yet will have been presidents for 16, maybe 20 years. It's much more, and have appointed 6 justices of the 9 on the Supreme Court. So when it serves as a way of entrenching minority rule, and it requires the minority's agreement to get rid of, it's just not going to happen if they're self-interested.
Yeah.
There is an analogy, of course, Ian, between this and proportional representation first past the post. Why would the political parties actually vote for change when it's actually not in their interests to do so? Again, we can go back over the years and see similar problems with respect to the British electoral system, that actually there's a fundamental unfairness. Someday, maybe in the 23rd century, we might get it right.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a good moment, actually, just to sort of remind our online viewers in particular that if they do have any questions for our panel, if they're following along on Facebook, they can drop questions in the comments. If anyone's following on YouTube, there should be a chat running alongside that. And if you do drop questions in for any member of our panel, we'd be really happy to look to answer those questions. And brilliant producer Darren, who we met earlier on, is expert at flashing those questions up as they come through. I just wanted to move on. We talked a little bit about the Republicans and Democrats. Obviously, the US election is very much about personalities and individuals, but I was quite interested just to understand, again, from the position of someone who's voted in the UK election, that what the difference between those two parties are kind of ideologically. I think we often sort of make the analogy between kind of left and right, and obviously Conservative and Labour. But is that a fair analogy, or are the differences between Republican and Democrats as a party and the people that they sort of historically represent? Is that fair? What are the key differences? And again, I think that's possibly one where Mike, if you maybe want to start there.
Yeah, I do think that that's largely fair. I mean, I think that there are different class structures and racial cleavages and social cleavages in the U.S. that the partisan that have been more prominent historically than in the UK, that the party system in the U.S. maps onto, and vice versa. So there are differences, but I do think it's generally fair to say that the Democrats are a center to left party like the Labour Party, and the Republicans are a center to right party like the Conservatives. I mean, you have lots of people in America who think that, oh, well, the Conservatives are basically like the centrist Democrats, which is not true. And I tell this to to everybody. Tell this to everybody. It's not true. You can compare, right? And there are people who do these comparisons. I think there are questions about what's happened to the Republican Party under Trump that has put some distance between traditional governing right parties in Europe, like the Conservatives, and has maybe moved the U.S. Republicans more into the realm of the kind of the radical right parties of Europe, right? But I mean, nonetheless, the social transformations that are still going on, right? That are shuffling the party allegiances. So I mean, obviously, in the U.S. from the time of FDR, the Democrats were identified as the party of the working man. Republicans were generally a party of professionals and more conservative people, and they had a liberal wing, and lots of stuff happened. And now we're in this period of where new alignments are coming in, where we've seen increasingly the Republicans win the votes of white voters without a university education, which used to be mainly a Democratic Party constituency back in the day. And now the Democrats are increasingly winning suburban or white voters who have university educations. Similar things have gone on in British politics. Like, these are not completely unknown shifts, though there are differences. And it's in particular the age polarization that happens in the UK doesn't seem to be quite replicated in the US. But I think it is generally fair to see similarities between the parties. But you just have to, like I was saying earlier, just keep in mind that they're different societies in some ways, and that they align a bit differently. But I do, just to get to briefly to your point about personality, I does see the personalities do matter in terms of who they turn out to vote. I think it's safe to say that Trump gets a certain voters to come out and vote for him that don't show up when he's not on the ballot and they have to vote for other Republicans. And you saw the same thing with Obama. When you had the full Obama coalition engine running, the Democrats were very hard to beat. But when he wasn't on the ballot himself, the personality, the lack of personality and attention, and that slipped a bit. And I think that's in a personality-centered system of politics, that's bound to happen to a certain extent.
And that sort of moves me on to my next question, and I whether this is one that Alex or Finn sort of want to pick up is polling. Polling's not had a good 4 or 5 years, and obviously it looks like the pollsters are probably sweating a little bit in the US right now as well. Just obviously reasonably ahead in the polls. Alex, from that sort of I guess public relations perspective, why might it be that the pollsters can get it wrong quite consistently now, where I think that they've probably up until 4 or 5 years ago had a pretty good track record of predicting the outcome of the elections?
Well, one of the challenges, Ian, with respect to polls is that they actually use algorithms, which obviously change and shift depending on the situations that people are actually faced with. And because of those evolutions, that actually to expect them to actually come up with the goods all the time is naive, particularly when things do tend to change literally on the basis of the kind of moods people were in when they were polled, the sample that were actually selected, the sort of changing aspects that they might have actually had. I think it's unfair, certainly, to actually just use the pollsters as the whipping boys to say, you've got it wrong again, because at the end of the day, that's part of the democratic situation, the fact that actually the final outcome is uncertain until effectively we know the actual process. Otherwise, why bother actually having the whole election in the first place? We just actually hand it over to poll numbers and just take it on that basis. So I think one has to have a certain sympathy with them, and certainly they are a key part of the process for analysts of politics and so on. But I think they are part of the whole sort of indication of where things are going. I mean, it's interesting. We see keystone states like Pennsylvania, sort of not only founding members of the whole thing, but clearly fundamental to the whole process. And again, those sort of issues in terms of where are we going to go. We like to know the future, and then we don't like to. It's almost as though we're torn amongst ourselves in terms of wanting to actually know whether, yes, everything's going to come through or it isn't. Populism can never be underestimated, sadly, because it leads sometimes to very unexpected outcomes. And I think we're seeing that certainly in our current climate and probably for the foreseeable future.
And I think that brings us on nicely. We've got to wrap up soon. I can't believe we've gone to almost, approaching 40 minutes already. We could talk for hours and hours on this, I'm sure. But that leads to sort of my final question, which I'd address to Finn, which is really that sort of question of what happens next, and what might the next sort of 24, 48 hours hold, and where might we be early in the new year? What would, not that I want you to make predictions like a pollster, but what do you think needs to happen now, and what do you think might be happening in the foreseeable future?
Well, I think this goes back to some of the things that Mike particularly was talking about at the beginning. I think you'd obviously rather probably be Joe Biden at this point. He's ahead in more of the states, and he doesn't need so many of them as Trump needs. If those leads hold, particularly in Nevada, Wisconsin, and Michigan, in theory, he could be, he could have the number of electoral college votes he needs, within the kind of time frame Mike was talking about at the beginning. The question will then be, how far in the courts does Trump take it? If Trump decides to concede, then the next thing will be this very complicated process of transitions. Up to the 2016 case, the view was that a much more sort of well-organized transition process was in place, because there's a huge number of appointments that presidents have to make. It's not just the cabinet; it's a vast range of appointments. And in order to be able to hit the ground running on and after Inauguration Day, they need to do a hell of a lot of work in the sort of period from the election to Inauguration Day. Now, Trump sort of threw a lot of that out the window in 2016, partly because of his sort of view that the bureaucracy was, he didn't feel that all these posts needed to be filled, and they were quite sort of blasé about the whole process of transition. Now, it'll be interesting also to see how will the Trump team act towards that process. Will they be cooperative? Will they be difficult? What might they do in the congressional lame duck, especially given they will still have Senate control? There's a lot of uncertainties, even if we do get a settlement of the race quicker than we might have thought we would, say at 3:30 this morning.
Yeah. Well, I'm really grateful for everyone's contributions this afternoon, and I just really regret that unfortunately Jessica wasn't able to stay with us. I think unfortunately her connection dropped out, but no, I'm really grateful for everyone who's joined us, and unfortunately we've had a few questions through. I think we're just running out of time to answer those questions, but I hope that's been an enjoyable conversation and discussion for everyone involved and for the people following along online. I'll probably just invite producer Darren just to step back in, because anyone who's following online, there are some other online activities happening this evening, including our live link up, which is starting shortly, which I think Darren's closely involved in making his magic happen again behind the scenes. So now just to let our viewers know, if they want to stay with us, what their options are.
Yeah, sure, no problem. That was a really good talk, by the way. Thank you. And I hope all the viewers enjoyed it as well. But yeah, if you do have any questions about just general study at University of Lincoln, could be an undergraduate program, could be about accommodation, or anything other than the US elections, perhaps, head over to our website. In fact, I'll put the URL up right now, but just head over to our website and look for the live link up page. There should be a link on the homepage, and go there, and there'll be staff and students there available for I'm not sure what time it finishes exactly, but they'll be there for a short amount of time after this finishes, and they'll be able to have a chat with you and talk to you and answer any questions that you have about life at Lincoln.
And of course, I think we have our next live lounge event the same time next Wednesday, and I think we're looking at a different topic. I think it's criminology next week. So yes, that should be
very apt for the American elections in many ways, perhaps.
Yes, maybe not a reference to Trump.
I open to you, didn't I? There, Alex. So I think we'll leave it there and just thank everyone, and hope everyone has a really good evening. And I'm sure people will be following the news feeds and the news. And no, it's been a really interesting 24 hours for anyone with an interest in politics or media or international relations and history. So I'm just really grateful for the contributions tonight, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks.